friends, I'm Rachel from EVPL Central. Welcome to Chapter Book Storytime, the Variety Pack. So I have been waiting genuinely months for this book to come out so we could read it together. I am so excited that we are going to do this. We are reading Witchlings by Claribel A. Ortega. I've been so excited for this one, and in this one we are going to be following Seven Salazar. She lives in a magical town where everyone has some amount of magical ability, and at the age of 12 you go through what is called the Black Moon ceremony, and you are sorted into your coven. So the people that you will be working with and doing magic with for the rest of your life, essentially. And Seven has just turned 12. It is time for her Black Moon ceremony, and we are going to follow her along to see how that goes. All right, take a second and get comfy and ready to listen, and we will get started. Let me find the page. Okay, looks like it starts with a poem. In the darkness of the woods, listen, listen well. Every little noise you hear might be the thing that dwells. Crunching leaves, a subtle breeze, or a monster as it breathes. Now, the monster's hunting you. It's too late. We've let him loose. Lock the windows, shut the lights. Wrap your little ones up tight. Hang the rue and heed the bells. Beware, beware, the thing that dwells. From the Ballad of the Night Beast, from the 12 Towns Book of Folk Song. Chapter 1. Anything but a spare. It was the night of the Black Moon ceremony, and the very last thing Seven Salazar wanted was to be a spare witch. Now that she was 12, she'd be placed in her coven, but like every ceremony before, tonight 3 witches would be left over. Spares. Nobody ever wanted to be a spare. Seven had done everything she could think of, studied for her CAT exams, attended every witching social event she could fit on her calendar. She even joined the toad racing team and got stuck with the slowest, crankiest toad of the lot. At least his name, Edgar Allan Toad, sort of made up for it, but only sort of. It wasn't like Seven had to do all of these things either. Everyone in her year got to participate in the Black Moon ceremony, of course, but it was a long-standing belief among witches that the harder you studied and worked, the more likely you were to get into one of the cool covens. Seven tied her combat boots and slipped on her oversized purple hoodie before securing her pointy hat on her curly hair with some pins. They'd give her a giant black ceremonial robe when she got to the town square, but it was thin and the night was cold. She didn't want to freeze her buns off. She shot a quick text to her friend Poppy, telling her how excited she was for tonight. Duh, Poppy wrote back, and me too. Can't wait to be coven sisters. Seven smiled at the message as she walked into the kitchen, where her mother, Fox, was putting the celebration cake in the fridge to cool. Sev, you got your amulet, right? Fox wiped her slender fingers on her apron and let down her curly red hair. It's only the whole point of tonight, Mom, Seven said, holding up the amulet that hung around her neck. Later that night, it would light up with the same color as the other witches in her coven. Please, please let it turn purple. The color of House Hyacinth. The coven Seven and Poppy had dreamed of being placed into for, just about their whole lives. Remember, things will work out okay, no matter what happens tonight, Fox said. Easy for you to say, grumbled Seven, looking at the bright aquamarine pendant that hung from the necklace Fox always wore. The blue stone signified the House of Stars, one of the most popular covens. Seven would have a much better chance of achieving her biggest dream, becoming a witching world-famous journalist, if she was in one of the powerful covens like her mom. It was pretty much the opposite of being a spare, because being a spare meant your destiny and magic didn't match up with anyone else's. Being a spare meant you didn't belong, and Seven wanted desperately to belong. As Fox moved around the kitchen, the moonlight hit her pendant and seemed to adorn everything around her with shimmering stars. Seven used to wonder if her mother had gotten her name because of her red hair, which she always thought looked lovely with her deep brown skin and freckled face. Seven looked more like her dad, tawny brown skin and dark curls. But now she knew it was more likely that her mother had been named Fox because of how cunning she was. In their world, the 12 towns, a child's name was a prophecy passed down from her grandmother or the town gran, their leader. Seven had no idea what her name meant. Not yet, anyway. But like any name given in Ravenskill, one day its meaning would be discovered. It was just a matter of time. Seven began tapping drum beats on the closest object, trying to match the beat of her fluttering heart. "You're still nervous about being a spare?" Seven's father Talus asked, strolling into the room. He was carrying her baby brother Browcherai, who everyone affectionately called Beefy, because of both his roundness and his unnatural strength. He was also unusually tall for his age, already 3 toadstools long, when Seven had only been 2 when she was a baby. Beefy pulled on his father's ears, and Talus cringed. The baby's grip could be painful. Seven rubbed her scalp, more flashbacks of Beefy pulling on her curly hair coming back to her. "I'm not just nervous, Dad, I'm freaking out. What if I didn't do enough? Or what if the magic gets fudged somehow? Or..." Seven dropped her voice in an ominous whisper. "I get placed with Valley." Valley Pepperhorn was the literal worst. Valley had been bullying Seven for as long as she could remember, putting weird things in her rucksack, hiding Edgar Allan Toad before a race, or giving dirty looks to Seven and Poppy. She was mean, scary, and came from one of the families on the hill. They were the wealthiest witches in town and thought they ran everything. Well, they sort of did run everything, actually. The only witches they couldn't go up against were the town gran and uncle. The chances of that happening are not high. But even if it does, any witch can be a friend if you just give them a chance, her mother said. Seven held back a snort. Seven was almost positive Valley was a cuckoo, or at least part gremlin. Her parents didn't see the way Valley snapped at their professors and didn't seem to care about her schoolwork or how she was always on her own doing sneaky, probably terrible things. Sometimes when Seven thought about it, she thought what her life would be like without Poppy and without her family. She felt almost sad for Valley, who had no friends and the scariest parents ever. But then Valley would do another awful thing and Seven wouldn't feel so bad for her anymore. None of it would matter after tonight anyway, Seven reminded herself, because once she and Poppy were placed in House Hyacinth, she wouldn't have to deal with Valley ever again. In all the past Ravenskillian Black Moon ceremonies she'd researched in preparation, not one showed an example of best friends sorted into different houses. Tierden Whisperbrew, the famous, coolest reporter of all time and Seven's idol, was sorted into House Hyacinth right alongside their best friend and now owner of the Squawking Crow newspaper, Inkpen Killian. They were a dynamic duo, and Seven looked forward to her and Poppy following in their footsteps. "Come on then, it's almost midnight, and Gran will hex us if we're late," Talus grunted as he placed Beefy in his stroller. The baby swung his legs and cooed happily as he was strapped in. When he was done, Talus kneeled down in front of Seven. "A hug for good luck?" he asked, and Seven smiled as her dad pulled her into a warm embrace. Talus, short for talisman, had always been lucky. Seven pinched his cheeks before a test for an extra boost. A brilliant blue pendant hung from his neck, the same color as her mother's. It's how her parents had met, after all. They'd been placed into the same coven as kids. "No matter what happens tonight, we're all proud of you," said Talus. Seven scrunched her face at him. "Even Beefy?" Talus laughed. "Especially Beefy. He has no idea what's going on, but he's still proud of you too. Let's go." The town square was just across the cemetery under a bridge and past the Bruised Apple bookshop, which had been recently taken over by a new family in town. A shadow dashed across the night, and Seven jumped and clutched her mother's arm. "It was only a rabbit," Fox said softly. Seven laughed nervously. "I knew that." She did not know that. There had been sightings lately. Sightings of a monstro called the Night Beast, a giant wolf that ate witchlings. Or at least, that was the rumor at Seven's school. Her teachers had assured them those were all rumors, but she had noticed the older witches around town had begun enchanting their garden gates with stay-away spells, hanging rue from their trellises and above their doors, and panicking on the Ravenskill message boards. All signs that a creature lurked near. Seven had walked this way to town 1,000 times, many times on her own. Tonight, she was grateful to have her family with her on the cold, dark path, even if it had only been a rabbit. The Salazars arrived just as the other families were gathering around the cascading furniture at the center of town. Lanterns hung from trees around the square in groups of 5 to symbolize the incoming covens. The light cast a warm orange glow on everything it touched and left a few corners cloaked in shadow. Poppy and her mother were there. They waved at Seven as she took her place in the circle around the fountain, and Seven felt an urge of happiness. Her oldest friend ran over to her, and it seemed everyone's eyes followed her. Poppy had always been the more popular of the two of them, cheerful and optimistic, to Seven's anxious determination, but they had always gotten along. Seven, I didn't sleep well at all. Not a wink, Poppy said breathlessly. Me either. I feel like my eyeballs are going to explode, Seven said. Poppy laughed. Cake at my place after? Said Seven. Pineapple? Poppy raised an eyebrow. Of course, Seven said and smiled. Pineapple jam cake was her favorite, and her family's recipe was famous. The crowd began to shuffle uneasily. It was almost time. No matter what, Poppy said hurriedly, we stay friends, no matter what coven we're in. Deal? She held her pinky out, for their best friends swear. Deal. Seven linked her pinky with Poppy's, and they swayed their arms to and fro 3 times. The pair of witchlings devolved into laughter, the excitement of the ceremony too much to contain. They hugged, and Poppy ran back to her parents. The town uncle, second in command to the Gran, walked around handing each witchling a long black robe. He was the most powerful witch in Ravenskill after the Gran. Town Grans got their power from the stars, while town uncles got their powers from nature and could even speak to animals. The uncle was charged not only with being the Gran's right hand in everything she did, but also in being the liaison for and caretaker of all the animals in Ravenskill, an immensely important job indeed. He wore the customary special occasion robe of the uncle, adorned with trees and various animals enchanted to scuttle about the fabric, and, of course, the bluebird brooch he received when he became uncle. Here you go, Seven Salazar, correct? The uncle asked when he reached Seven. Yep. Seven took the folded black robe as the uncle crouched down to coo at Beefy. Oh my, look at his fat little feet, the uncle said sweetly. But then Beefy grabbed the uncle's furry green hat and began to chew on it. So sorry, said Seven, pulling the hat, not without a struggle, from Beefy's grip and handing it back to the uncle. The uncle just laughed and moved on to the next witchling. Talus and Fox retreated to the outer circle with Beefy in tow, giving Seven an encouraging smile and snapping pictures as they joined the other parents. The ceremony was about to begin. Seven slipped into her robe, taking deep breaths and softly chanting, "Not a spare, not a spare, not a spare," as if it were a life-saving spell. Oh, sorry, someone bumped into Seven from behind and nearly knocked her into the fountain, which was now lit up with a deep green glow. Careful, Seven said, straightening up to face the girl who bumped her. It was someone she'd never seen before. The Gran is watching us. The Gran had arrived and was standing on a floating platform at the center of the fountain, water splashing just below her feet. Though it was dark and foggy, she seemed to eye each of them carefully, and Seven swore she could see inside her brain. Like most everyone else, the Gran was dressed in all black, but the fabric of the Gran's long black coat was enchanted to look like the night sky. She was famous for her coat, which held magical objects and changed color like the sky. The most brilliant of the visions was the stars and moons spinning around each other in a glittering sky, an ode to Gran's real name, Nox, an ancient word that meant night. From under her pointy hat fell a cascade of gray braids that she always had done in the colder months, her tight curls loose and flowing whenever it was warm out. "I'm Thorn," said the girl next to Seven. Seven gave her the side eye, taking in her straight, short, black hair and bangs, her round, pale face, and flush red lips. She was much shorter than Seven, petite in every way. Even her feet were small. Her shoes looked like they were less than half a toadstool long. Despite the darkness, she could see her eyes were a deep, dark blue. There were tiny pins, like the kind seamstresses use to hold fabric in place, stuck into her hat. It was interesting her name was Thorn, since she sort of looked like a rose, but was also being a real pain in the buns. "You must be the new girl," Seven said. Thorn nodded so quickly her witch's hat almost flew off. "I'm pretty nervous," said Thorn. Seven sighed. "I'm Seven Salazar. Hi. I think we might be starting soon." Right, Thorn said, and locked her lips, throwing away the key. A few moments passed in silence. "Nice to meet you, by the way. Which coven are you hoping to be placed in?" whispered Thorn, almost immediately forgetting about her locked mouth. Mercifully, the Gran raised her arms and the crowd went silent, saving Seven from having to fib and say whatever she got would be a blessing. From the moment they began their magical training, they were told and told again and again that their coven was their destiny and that being ungrateful for fate's gifts would curse them with bad luck. Or even worse than bad luck, if you truly didn't accept your given house, then you couldn't be sealed with your coven during the ceremony. They'd stay witchlings. But that hadn't happened in many years. Tonight marks the 205th Black Moon ceremony in the town of Ravenskill, the Gran began to say. Everyone clapped politely. Across from Seven's line of vision stood Valley's parents. They wore expensive-looking coats with sharp lines and leather gloves. They stood rigid, looking in Valley's direction intently after each one of the Gran's proclamations, while everyone else cheered loudly. They barely clapped, as if this was the most boring event in the entire world. Valley looked miserable, but then again, she always did. She stood opposite Seven in the circle of witchlings, scowling, her hair tucked behind her ears and her hat sitting haphazardly on her head. "I'm so nervous," whispered Thorn again. Seven had to force herself not to move away. Instead, through clenched teeth, she warned, "Stop talking, or I'm going to hex you to be my toad's wife." That shut her up, at least for now. "And now," claimed the Gran, "for the reason we've all gathered here tonight, the forming of the covens." Where before there was a low murmur of noise throughout the square, now everything was deadly quiet. "Witchlings, prepare your amulets." Oh crap, I can't do that on camera! "And now," exclaimed the Gran, "for the reason we're all gathered here tonight, the forming of the covens." Before, there was a low murmur of noise throughout the square. Now everything was deadly quiet. "Witchlings, prepare your amulets." With a collective ruffle of fabric, the 28 witchlings pulled out their crystal amulets, which hung from black cords around their necks, and held them in front of their faces. "Now, intone the spell with me." All at once, voices rose, reciting the Black Moon song they'd known all their lives, but were not allowed to sing aloud till this night. Seven's heart fluttered as she began. "A coven is 5, in death and in life, to believe, to protect, never doubt or neglect, bound with our magic before the black moon, bound by a circle, for no circle spells doom." As the final words left their lips, purple smoke snaked from their mouths to dance at the center of the circle, right above the Gran's head. Then, with a flick of her wand, she sent the smoke careening back and straight into the amulets, which began to whir and vibrate. Seven's amulet spun wildly, and she closed her eyes, begging one final time for the thing she begged for, whenever she thought of this night. Please, let it turn purple. All around her, covens began to form. 5 amulets turned the bright aqua color of her parents' coven. House of Stars, said the Gran. Brilliant, beautiful, generous to all. The witchlings squealed and ran off together, holding hands in their own circle. They would be a new wing, a 5-witch coven, part of the larger Grand House of Stars now. Another group got a deep black, the color of obsidian, for Moth House. Mysterious, morbid, dependable friends, intoned the Gran to enormous cheers from the crowd, including a group of parents who looked like they had died last week. Moth House was the creepiest coven. Their black lipstick and pale makeup was pretty cool, 7 could admit. 7 was a bit surprised that Valley hadn't been sorted into Moth House, but it was probably the dependable friend part. Witchlings embraced and joined their new covens happily, and all the while 7 waited, eyeing Poppy anxiously. Next, the witchlings for the emerald-colored Frog House, focused, frugal, truthful to the last, were placed. And now there were only 2 covens left to form before the spares. There would be 3 spares tonight, 7 knew. Valley being a spare would make sense, since she was always falling behind in all her classes and had 0 friends. There were a few kids from her class, ones who never fit in, who 7 could see being sorted into the spare coven. A girl named Starlight whooped when her amulet began to glow purple. This is it, thought 7. House Hyacinth. Her house. Next came a boy named Kane, which 7 knew was short for hurricane. 7 and Poppy looked at each other, and 7 had to hold back a giggle, excited for their amulets to go purple. A girl she recognized from her class, one who always ignored her and whose name she couldn't remember, was chosen. And then her best friend was chosen too. 7's heart gave an awful lurch as the 2 friends looked at each other with delight. There was only 1 spot left. She glanced down at her own dull amulet, then over at her best friend. Poppy's amulet was a vibrant purple. Poppy's face dropped as she looked at 7, all their plans of being coven sisters unraveling. She quickly corrected herself, giving 7 a smile and turning away to join her new coven. 7 knew that Poppy couldn't betray her assignment. Even one misgiving about what coven you were placed into could spell disaster, could prevent your coven from closing. That didn't make it hurt any less. House Hyacinth, said the Gran, valiant, virtuous, powerful in all things. House Hyacinth got the loudest cheers yet, and the awful truth truly sank in. No, this couldn't be happening. 7 was supposed to be with Poppy. That's how they'd always planned it. Best friends were supposed to be placed together. So why weren't they? Okay, 7, just breathe. At least there was another coven left. 7 would be in the Goose House coven. 7 focused, taking deep, calming breaths, trying not to fidget, as a beautiful pearl cover filled 1 amulet and then another. A 4th witchling entered the Goose coven, and there was only 1 more amulet to go. 7 held her breath. But when the last amulet lit up a shimmering white, it wasn't hers. Goose House, said the Gran. Clever, chaotic, mostly good. The happy squeals of the other covens turned to whispers and sighs of relief, 7 thought with a cringe. They were all happy not to be her. Shame washed over 7, and she was glad for the cover of night so no one would see how bright pink her face turned when she was embarrassed. 7's amulet filled with the muddy red color of the spare coven, and she shut her eyes tight, wishing she could just disappear. Her stomach felt sour, like she'd eaten something rotten, but at least she was keeping her tears at bay. 7's eyes flew open as she realized she was too caught up in her own panic to notice who was left with her, who shared the shame of being left for last. She followed the red glow from her amulet to the one right next to her, to Thorn. Panicked, she scanned the circle until she spotted the unmistakable red glow coming from Valley. Valley Pepperhorn's amulet shone a bright red, and a happy sneer crossed her face. Not Valley anyone, but Valley. Even her toad would be better than that. But this was her awful reality. Just 3 misfit witches, a red glow all around them, and the unmistakable truth that 7 was a spare. Chapter 2, Forever Witchlings. This is so exciting, Thorn said as the 3 witches gathered in their circle to complete the ceremony. It's not exciting. We're the spares. Everyone is laughing at us, 7 said hotly. All the soon-to-be-formed covens were assembling into circles around the square, waiting for the Grand to seal their fates. Technically, they were still witchlings until the circle was sealed, cementing them as a true coven. Everyone's coven had to be sealed by a magical contract to contain the magic and the witches in their own circles. It was meant to keep anyone from adding more coven members or becoming too powerful. Though 7 couldn't help but think that as a spare, being powerful wasn't something she'd have to worry about. Valley just stood there, looking smug. Why would she be smug about this? Exasperated, 7 grabbed the hands of the 2 witchlings beside her. She felt a chill as her fingers closed around Valley's cold, clammy hand. Of course she felt like a cold-blooded vampire. It would be a shock if Valley Pepperhorn even had a heart. 7 couldn't keep herself from shaking her head, even as she saw the other covens around them start to close. You're both bonkers. Why are you okay with this? Being a spare it's the worst thing that could ever happen, 7 said. She dropped the other witchling's hands. Maybe neither of you understand this, but being a spare means we will be the town outcasts for our entire lives. 7 ticked each point off on her fingers. No advanced magic, no flying. We'll probably be stuck working for one of the terrible families on the... 7 looked at Valley before finishing her thought. One of the terrible families on the hill. Valley just shrugged. She looked bafflingly smug, and 7 wanted to scream. It's still not the worst thing, and we're not supposed to question our coven or be ungrateful. If you don't remember that, our circle won't close, Thorn warned. Besides, I've never had 2 friends at the same time, Thorn said almost under her breath. I know being a spare is not the best, but no coven means we'd be forever witchlings. Panic rose up in 7's throat. She knew Thorn was right, and that she just had to adjust her attitude unless she wanted to stay a forever witchling. Witches who never formed a coven, witches who lost their magic completely. 7 took a deep breath, then let one out. She could not let that happen, but fear prickled her skin. It was bad enough she was stuck with a coven of spares, but being a forever witchling was the most awful thing that could happen to anyone in the 12 towns. No magic meant all her years of practice and hard work learning spells would go out the window. She had no chance at her dream job as a reporter for the town newspaper, The Squawking Crow. That required level 5 magic, advanced incantations and spells that spares rarely achieved, but forever witchlings never ever could. She'd be even worse off than she was today, stripped of all magical powers, without all her current abilities and never able to learn anything new. 7 thought that a spare was her worst nightmare, but she had never even considered being a forever witchling. That would be infinitely worse. You're right. I'm sorry, 7 said. I was just really looking forward to my coven. Well, we're it, said Valley, speaking for the first time. 7 and Thorn both stared at the odd girl. She didn't look like any of the other kids from the hill, with their pastel-colored clothes, neat hair, and bright smiles. No, Valley was quite the opposite. For one thing, she was tall, way taller than either 7 or Thorn, and probably all the other kids in their class, too. It wasn't unusual for witchlings to wear black. In fact, it was 7's favorite color, but Valley never, ever wore anything different. It was always black top, jeans, boots, and sweater. She wore dark eyeliner all the time. Her nails were always painted black, and sometimes she even wore black lipstick like the Moth House witches. 7's mom would never let her wear lipstick, and especially not black. The only colorful thing was Valley's rusty-colored pink hair. It was the color of a dried up rose, and Seven thought it was really pretty. She always wished her parents would let her use enchant dyed. The Gran cleared her throat, and they all fell silent. She raised her wand and began to intone the sealing spell. This was it. Once the spell was cast and Seven's circle closed, they'd be bound for life. What a bummer. From witchling to witch, let the circles be sealed, let the covens be closed, and true friendship revealed. Seven felt a surge of magic, warm and strong, pulse through her body as the amulet shone brightly and began to spin. She tried her best not to look at the other covens, but it was hard not to watch, as black, aqua, green, white, and she felt sick, purple light formed a beautiful circle around each of the covens and then exploded in a burst of light, signaling the completion of their ceremony. Seven waited for the circle above the spare coven to do the same, but as the seconds and then minutes passed, nothing happened. The cheers of the other covens faded, and silence grew around them until it was a bloated monster waiting to pop. Panic swelled in Seven's chest, and she had to keep her eyes on her amulet, focusing on nothing else to keep from crying. Concerned whispers and then snickers began as finally the Gran raised her wand, ready to signal the end of the ceremony. She couldn't signal that this was over. Not yet. Oh, please, not yet. The moment the Gran wand flourished 3 times in the air, the ceremony would be over, and if Seven's circle didn't close, they would remain witchlings forever. Seven would lose her magic. "I'm gonna be sick," Seven said. Valley was silent, and Thorn worried the hem of her oversized black and red polka-dotted dress. The Gran waved her wand once, twice, and "Wait!" Seven yelled out, and gasps resounded from the crowd. No one ever interrupted the Gran. "Are you bonkers?" Valley asked through clenched teeth. Despite her fear, Seven almost smirked. So Valley did care about something. She was scared of the Gran. The old woman raised an eyebrow at Seven, but kept her wand up mid-flick. She seemed to be inspecting her, and Seven worried the Gran could see every doubt and fear in her mind. Slowly, she lowered her wand. "Seven Salazar," came the Gran's voice, loud and echoing in the crisp fall night. "Step forward." Seven found her parents in the crowd, and they nodded at her encouragingly, but there was worry in their eyes. Beefy made the face he always made when he was pooping. Gross. Seven stepped forward, and Bally grabbed her arm, the cold from her hand going right through Seven's hoodie. "What are you doing, Salazar? Are you trying to get us banished from town?" Her voice was low, rushed, and desperate. "Chill, I know what I'm doing." Seven did not know what she was doing. She stepped closer to the center of the square and looked up at the Gran. She looked even more intimidating up close, like a sea of black fabric and twinkling stars, like a goddess. Seven's eyes teared up just looking at her. "Gran?" Seven projected her voice as much as she could. Tried to make herself sound confident, despite the nervous energy coursing through her. She wanted to run all the way home and hide under her covers forever. Or maybe the ground would just open up right now and swallow her whole. It would be quite convenient. But she wouldn't run, and nothing would save her right now. She had to do this herself. "Gran," she repeated, making a circle with her hand and holding it to her chest in the sign for respect. The Gran pressed the tip of her fingers to her mouth and then gestured at Seven. A blessing. She could speak. "I'm sorry for the interruption, but I'd like to invoke the clause of the impossible task." The crowd around them gasped, but Seven continued undaunted. "As we've learned, any witch is entitled to invoke this clause in order to save themselves and their coven from permanent witchlingdom. I know it's not done often, and I know the task we'll receive is impossible, but I'm willing to take the chance." The Gran raised her other eyebrow, so both eyebrows were now high on her face, and she looked equal parts amused and surprised. "Oh," said Thorn from somewhere behind Seven. Valley just grunted. The clause of the impossible task was not to be used lightly. It provided a chance for forever witchlings to close their circles by completing an impossible task. Impossible because only one coven of the 8 who'd invoked the clause in the history of the 12 towns had solved it. But Seven had to try. Once they were proclaimed forever witchlings, They'd never have the chance to become full-fledged witches again. This was their only shot. You said I am willing to take the chance, Seven. But in a coven, there is only we. Is your coven okay with this? The Grand asked. Seven turned around, her face pleading, her heart racing. Valley was scowling angrily, her arms crossed. Thorn had hands clasped and was biting her bottom lip, but nodding enthusiastically. It's better than being a forever witchling, Thorn said. I say let's do it. Seven beamed, then turned to Valley expectantly. Valley shrugged one shoulder. Fine. We're already the literal worst. Might as well try. Seven gave Valley a reluctant smile and turned back to the Gran. My coven is on board, Gran. Very well. You have my blessing. I will consult the oracle and your task will present itself in the next few hours. Seven gulped. She had hardly gotten used to the idea of being a spare, and now she'd have to deal with whatever the impossible task would be. Would they have to construct a seaworthy ship and find the elusive boggy crone river creature? Find invisible plants? Defeat a warlock in a magical duel? It could be anything. I will then deliver your impossible task in accordance with the 12 towns' laws. Until then, you remain witchlings. The Grand gestured for the spares to come forward, and as they stood there lined up, she made a giant X over their heads, magic to seal the contract until the impossible task began. And then they would have only 3 weeks. 3 weeks to solve a mystery, 3 weeks to complete the task, 3 weeks to fix this, or they'd lose their magic and be witchlings forever. Seven looked at Valley and Thorn. She wasn't sure how she was supposed to solve the task with her bully and someone she didn't even know. What Seven did know was that she had never given up on anything before, that she was smart, she was capable, and no matter what was thrown her way, Seven was ready. Chapter 3, The Impossible Task. As it turned out, Seven was not ready. Moments after the Grand ended the ceremony, the oracle swept through the square, their long holographic cape billowing in the night breeze, their crystal ball suspended in the air beside them. They spoke to the Grand for only a minute, maybe 2, as curious Ravenskillians watched. The Grand looked taken aback by something the oracle had said and seemed to say, "Are you sure?" But Seven couldn't be positive. Whatever it was, the look on the Grand's face did not bode well. Seven's body tensed. Surely the oracle couldn't have seen their task already. But the colors inside the crystal ball were swirling, red mixed with swirls of gray. Seven wanted to run to her parents, but she didn't want to look like a baby. She wouldn't give the other witches in her class or the adults who were snickering and looking sorry for her the satisfaction. She would rather eat her witch's hat. Spares, the Grand called out. I have received your task from the oracle. Thank you, Sybil, the Grand said. The oracle nodded and retreated in the spares' direction. Seven had never seen them up close. Their high cheekbones shimmered with silver fey dust, a magic enhancer, and their long purple hair flowed in shiny waves. As they got closer, Seven noticed how sharp the edges of their face were, almost like they were carved from shiny rock. Good luck, Sybil whispered as they passed the witchlings. In their crystal ball, Seven swore she could see 2 glowing red eyes. Valley seemed to notice, and the 2 witchlings shared a brief glance before quickly turning back to the Grand in unison. The night buzzed with the whispers of their neighbors gossiping around them. The entire thing was embarrassing and infuriating, but the worst part was Poppy, who was standing with her super special and shiny coven, smiling and laughing, as if Seven wasn't about to be served her fate. She couldn't even look in Seven's direction, a traitor and a coward. Seven scowled but didn't take her eyes off the fountain. The gossipy Ravenskillians were like a swarm of bugs, annoying and gross, and she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of looking defeated. She put on her meanest, most fearsome look and kept her chin up in the air. Thorn had kept her eyes glued to the ground, like she was looking for a missing rat's tail, until Valley reached across Seven and flicked Thorn on the chin. Thorn looked at her startled, eyes wide as Valley gestured to Seven. You make your face look like hers, like you're about to hex someone. They want to see you upset. Don't let these butt toads win. Thorn wiped her tear-streaked face quickly and smiled softly at Valley. Seven had to work hard to Thorn wiped at her tear-streaked face quickly and smiled softly at Valley. Seven had to work hard to hide her shock. Valley was being nice? Ravenskillians, the Grand said. After only moments of scrying, the task has presented itself, and the Oracle and I have come to a unanimous conclusion. For the 9th time in history, 3 Witchlings have invoked the impossible task and will learn what challenge they face. Seven's insides felt all jumbled, and she felt like everything around her was spinning. Get hold of yourself, Salazar, she thought. The last thing she needed was to barf in front of the whole town. The Grand clapped her hands together, and a sound like thunder fell over them as the crowd cheered. We will convene in 21 days to grant you full-fledged witch status or for your punishment, which, according to the Oracle, the Grand seemed to pause and looked out over the crowd. Seven followed her gaze to the Oracle, who was standing at the edge of the square. They nodded, a grave look on their face. The Grand nodded in response and continued. Your punishment, if you fail, will be toadification. Should you survive, that is. The Grand's voice sounded heavy as Seven's heart fell. Your punishment, if you fail, will be toadification. Should you survive, that is. The Grand's voice sounded as heavy as Seven's heart felt. Toads. If they could not solve the task, they would be turned into toads. They couldn't believe that just hours earlier this night was going to be a happy one. Now it was pretty much the worst one she'd ever had. Thorn's parents hugged each other as they sobbed. Valley's mother wiped a tear carefully with a black handkerchief, and her father looked like he always did, uninterested. Fox and Talus were standing close, Talus's arm around Fox's shoulder as she held a sleeping Beefy. They looked at Seven the way they always did when she said she couldn't do something, with a look of determination and strength. And love. They looked as pale as ghosts. And now, for the task. Grand's voice echoed through the night. Now everyone was silent. It seemed like the entire town was holding their breaths, waiting to hear what the Grand would say. Thorn looked the color of spring moss, and Valley looked worried. Seven pretended to be brave, but wasn't feeling much better. Valley Pepperhorn, Seven Salazar, Thorn LaRue. Your impossible task. The 3 Witchlings leaned forward as one. If Seven had been sitting in a chair, she would have fallen out of it by now. Is to fell a night beast. And that is all the time we have. I wish I could keep going. I am very excited to see if and how they manage in just 3 weeks to kill a magical creature, especially as witchlings with apparently not much power. So if you also would like to continue following Seven and her friends on their journey, you can pick up a copy at one of our locations, or you can call and we can put it on hold for you. It is also available on the Hoopla app as an audiobook. All right, everyone, I will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye.